Hello and welcome to another Out of Spec Bits video. So today you join me with some unfortunate and sad news. The 2023 Volkswagen ID.4 all-wheel drive with the SK battery is what this car is, but any of them with the SK battery are under a battery recall. So it looks like it's not just LG Chem after all, it's also SK Innovation batteries. This is similar where you can have self-discharge on one cell and fire propagation throughout the pack. Very unlikely, probably not nearly as severe as the Bolt recall that happened years ago, but nonetheless, it is still under recall. So let's get into the video. I'm gonna go over calling the dealer, what the details are, and if you own this car, what you need to know, and try to talk to Alex from Out of Spec Renew about what he thinks about this and what this means, because one of their solutions is to replace a module if needed, which can cause obviously the older battery cells to be different in capacity from the new battery cell and can cause some discrepancy between balancing cells in the pack if that were to happen. So we're going to talk about that and the details and what that might mean if it came to that for some owners. So let's get into the video. Okay, so let's go over very quickly what the recall actually is. This is high voltage battery. NHTSA recall number 26V030. And the description is, in rare circumstances, the high voltage battery modules may experience a thermal propagation, possibly resulting in a vehicle fire. Customers may experience loss of range and or performance if the recall condition exists in the vehicle. Customers with vehicle concerns are advised to have the vehicle diagnosed by an authorized Volkswagen dealer, and the remedy is conduct a battery health check inspection and install updated self-discharge diagnosis or SDD software, and replace potentially affected high voltage battery cell modules if needed based on inspection or SDD software warning. So basically what's happening is there's potential misalignments with, I think it was a battery tab, something and others what they said, and we'll get into that more in a little bit here, but if they're self-discharging in one of the cells, it can eventually cause thermal runaway, which can spread to other cells, and in very rare, they said less than 1% or 1% or less of 44,000-ish cars are going to potentially have this. And so this self-diagnosis software is supposed to help tell if there is drain in one of the cells while the car is idle and not being used or not being called on for power. Then you can identify, like, okay, here's a problem, here's an issue. And so on a high level, that's what's happening, but let's get into the video further and start diagnosing or diving into more what this means for you as an owner and for me as an owner and what that will look like from the dealer. Okay guys, let's dive into what exactly is going on here. So I don't think I'm going to call the dealer after all, like I had mentioned, because they're not going to be able to tell me anything that I haven't already figured out, and they're just going to set up an appointment for me basically. But there are two distinct recalls here in the US, which you might not know at first glance if you just had one of the recalls. So first of all, we have the one I am under, thank goodness, affects 44,000 cars. And that is a software update to basically just detect if you have a problem at all. And it's just the self-diagnose or self-discharge software that'll help diagnose if you have any cells that are becoming imbalanced. And basically it's looking for cell imbalances as it's resting and stuff like that. I know from doing my own car, fortunately, I don't have any bad cell imbalances, so I probably don't have the issue, which is fantastic. But of course, we want to go through with the recall anyway. And we have a more severe 2022 through 2024 ID.4s, which are 670 vehicles affected, much less, but those are known hardware defects in the SK batteries that were manufactured. And I think a lot of them were Chattanooga, Tennessee is where a lot of those were made here. And so much smaller, but if you do find yourself in that, you probably have a guaranteed module replacement kind of situation. And these are the numbers. So the one I'm under, which is the software one, is 93EA. The more severe one, which is a hardware problem, is 93EV/W. And that is, in a nutshell, that is the US and the problem here. You're going to find out with the software, or you have a hardware defect, and that's the gist of it. If you, on a high level, that's what you really, really need to know. Coming worldwide, though, you may not know by just looking at this, this is a MEB problem. So MEB is Volkswagen's modular platform electric vehicle thing. That has about 100,000 cars affected. So in essence, this follows the whole ID lineup and like Cupra Born and some of their other sub-brands that use the MEB platform, which, you know, that gets to be a lot more. Now, I think fortunately, again, I don't have a breakdown of the exact difference between like the more severe hardware problems and just the software problems, but I think the vast majority of these are still software problems. And so they're just going to put a self-discharge diagnosis system. It doesn't seem as of right now this is anything as severe as like the Bolt recall was, where, you know, we had a lot of fires and that's what triggered them to freak out, and they basically didn't know exactly what was wrong, so they just had to replace everything. This doesn't seem to be quite that severe, and I think most of the cars don't have a problem, which is fantastic. But that's kind of it at a high level. I just wanted to cover the differences between these recalls and what's going on worldwide to give us a perspective of what's happening. And now let's go into talking to Alex about what this may mean for you as an owner, or me as an owner. If you did put this software on there and it says, okay, you have a problem in this module, we need to get a replacement, and they put new cells in that module. My battery has somewhere around like 7% degradation on it, I think, which is kind of a whole nother subject. It feels slightly high, but not too high for my 53,000 miles that I have on it. But either way, if you were to put new cells with the rest of the modules that are 7% degraded from new, what is that going to look like? Because the electricity is going to want to take that path of least resistance. And when you pull power out of a battery pack, the one group that has the least amount of internal resistance, which is the newest one, is the one it's going to want to pull the power from. And so very intelligent BMS systems can help with those issues, but there are still potential long-term problems with that, theoretically. And, you know, if that's where Alex's specialty is, and I want to talk to him more about that and what that could mean and what the state of EVs in general are with having quite a few more of these recalls. Fortunately, this doesn't seem to be, and a lot of them don't seem to be super big issues like the Bolt was. But let's get in there and talk to Alex about this and go over these details. Okay, here we are with Alex. Thank you for coming and helping discuss some of this and go over the details and concerns and what might be a problem, what might not. Yeah, so you've obviously done a lot of work on a lot of cars, and so I figured you'd be a great person to look into this stuff. First of all, we kind of discussed a little bit like what the gist of the issue here is that I just explained to everybody. What is there anything that stands out as a concern of the other than the obvious? It's a recall on a battery. Like, is there?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest thing that stands out to me is that the big thing for the main recall is the software update for the self-discharge detection. And self-discharge within cells is sort of a fairly common type of failure mode that is sort of like a terminal problem that leads to a lot of pack failures. So it's kind of interesting that they didn't have a self-discharge detection, and now they're adding it in to be able to detect that problem.
Yeah, you would think that kind of stuff would be in anything as complicated and complex as a full automotive battery, but yeah, basically, so the fundamental issue here is like the tabs in the battery cells, and I think they all use pouch cells for that, are misaligned, and that can be what causes the short. And right. That leads to overheating, self-discharging, and causing balance issues, and that's the long story short, which is that kind of core cause of things. But now when it comes to, if I have, like, for example, my car is 53,000 miles on it, I think I'm like 7% degradation, something like that. If you were to put a brand new module, because their solution here is taking one of those modules out and then putting a whole new module in whatever cells are affected, and that causes, does that leave any concern to you about balance, or having even if a car had 100,000 miles on it, is that going to be 15 over 10% degradation difference between the newest and this older cells? Is that going to lead to problems long term, or do you think would that be something they could deal with?
It could, yeah. So that's something that's really BMS dependent on how tolerant they're going to be to capacity imbalances within, modules or cells. But if you have a significant capacity imbalance, what's going to happen over time is, as you charge and discharge the pack, you're going to end up with an imbalance where it's going to get accentuated more and more over time. If the BMS has pretty good balancing capability, it can compensate for that differential by keeping the pack in balance. But most battery management systems don't have a super high balancing rate capability. So, they're designed to keep a pack in balance with, minimal cell capacity differences. So when you have bigger cell capacity differences, it can lead to a problem. And probably the main situations where that's going to be the biggest issue is cars that see a heavy use case. So cars that see a lot of daily mileage where they're being, charged and discharged a significant portion of the battery every day. Think like maybe a rideshare driver or something like that.
Yeah.
Cars that see a lot of DC charging. Where if it's, just a car that's being, normal daily driven, where it's driven, 20, 30, 40 miles a day, it's probably going to be less of a problem. But yeah, cell capacity imbalances are not a super great thing to have.
Yeah, that was definitely a concern of mine with that thought. Now, fortunately, I've done looking into my battery a little bit, which, when I got it, the cells all seem in balance and good. So I highly doubt there's actually an issue there, which speaks to the 1% or less that it seems to affect. So we hope so. We hope it stays that way, because that would concern me for, like you say, heavy use case where you've got a lot of, or even if, I do some towing with my car, or I did more, especially months back, and that I would wonder on lower end of the pack where you've got bigger differences, it can't keep up with that as much, and that can cause, like you say, fast charging would cause that, because it doesn't have time to necessarily balance all that out. So if you're just doing this over and over and over again, like ride sharing, that, yeah, I can definitely see that. And if it were your personal vehicle, what would be the thing you'd look out for? Obviously there's like cell imbalances, but is there anything else specifically you would think of?
That's the biggest thing to kind of watch out for. Usually what happens if you have a weak short condition is you're going to have one, cell group that's going to self-discharge. Even if the car's just sitting doing nothing, it's going to discharge, and it'll end up lower than the rest of the cell groups. And it's like I said before, it's kind of a common failure mode, usually on higher mileage packs for different EVs, because there's other things that can cause weak short failures other than cell defects. So if you're talking about a higher mileage pack that's seen a lot of charge and discharge cycles, things like dendrite growth can cause weak short conditions as well. So it's kind of just an end of life type of pack failure mode as well. Yeah,
that was one of the things I was trying to remember the word, and then you brought it up. But like just that age or high degradation causing little leaks or things in that can cause that in age. And but I don't know. I can't think of anything else other than that to go over. But I think that gives a good gist of what to expect and what to look out for with this. For me, fortunately, I don't feel too concerned. I don't think. I feel like mine, I've looked at, if all they're doing is looking at the millivolts between the cells, I feel pretty good about that. So other than that, I think hopefully that stays good.
Yeah. I would assume that what the software is going to be doing is it's going to be looking for, just that. It's going to be looking for any cell group that's discharging at a rate that's different than the rest of the cell groups, particularly when the car's sitting, right? If the car's sitting and the voltages are stable, but you have one cell that's discharging, that's going to be indicative of a weak short condition. I'll be curious to see if they end up with a specific DTC code for that type of failure, where the car will actually set a code for a weak short condition, or if they're just going to have some other code, like just a cell voltage imbalance code or something. Because at least in the case of Tesla, if there's a weak short condition, there's actually a specific alert that can be set in the alert logs for a detected weak short. In those situations, what Tesla does is they actually limit the charge level that the car will charge to. So they'll limit the charge level of the maximum cell to roughly 50-ish, maybe a little over 50%. It's like 3.8 volts per cell. So that's kind of the way that works. So if you ever look in like the forums and the Facebook groups and stuff, you'll see people that say, "Oh, my car won't charge to more than 40 or 50%," and that's because they have that condition where the car has limited the charge level. And of course, as the weak short continues and that cell group gets drawn further and further down, your usable capacity gets to be less and less, because your high cell is limited to 50%, but your low cell is going to be wherever it's at, and your usable capacity is going to be determined by your low cell. So it'll get to a point where it won't drive at all, because the low cell is all the way down at 0 and your high cell is at 50%. So it's kind of interesting thing.
Yeah, that's kind of a wild thing going on with Kyle's friend Ben that has a old Model S that's like under 20%. It just becomes completely unpredictable, and then eventually from 20% at the highway, it just goes slower and slower the longer you drive below 20%. And it's like you get full power at 100, and then it's like completely unpredictable on the bottom. And I don't know how that's not grounds for a battery replacement, because it's still under that warranty, but that's a whole nother subject that's fascinating that's going on. But I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. It's always concerning, especially for people who aren't as technical and minded as I think a lot of us are. So it's good to get that out and clarify things and know what's going on. But I appreciate that, and we will see you on another Out of Spec Bits video.
All righty. Looking forward to making it out there.